She thought her past was behind her until the day he walked back into her life. 10 years after leaving her for someone else, he had the nerve to ask for forgiveness. But what he didn't expect was the shocking truth she had been keeping all these years. What happens next will change everything. Stay tuned to find out what happens when he realizes the woman he betrayed is no longer the person he remembers. Sarah had never thought she'd return to the town where everything fell apart. A decade had passed since John left her, and in all that time, she'd built a new life. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had learned to let go of the past, or so she thought. The people here didn't know her anymore. They didn't know the girl who had cried in her room for weeks, wondering what went wrong. No, the woman who walked through those old streets was different, stronger, more self-assured, and at peace with herself. Yet, even as she entered the familiar town square, memories of John flooded her mind. She had never imagined she'd have to face him again. But as fate would have it, here she was. The first time she saw him, it wasn't in a dramatic reunion or a moment that felt destined. It was in a simple coffee shop, just another day. She had been standing in line ordering her usual when his voice cut through the hum of the crowd. Her heart skipped before she could even process what was happening. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years. She turned, half expecting it to be a cruel trick of her mind. But there he was, John, the man who had promised her forever, only to walk away without a word. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still handsome, still with that same confident smile that used to make her feel like the center of his world. But there was something different, something off. John noticed her, too. His eyes widened for a split second, and then, like a flicker of surprise in the middle of a storm, it was gone. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah?" he said, as though questioning if she was real, like he couldn't believe she was standing there. "John," she replied, her voice calm, but her stomach churned. She hadn't expected to see him like this, not here, not now. She thought she had moved on. But seeing him again, after all this time, stirred something she thought was long buried. She tried to push the feelings away. She wasn't that girl anymore. She couldn't let him back in, not after everything. He stepped closer, and she stiffened, unsure of what to do. He looked almost nervous. The confident, arrogant man who had left her so easily seemed distant now, vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice softer than she remembered. "Fine," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I've been fine, John." There was a brief pause before he said, "I've thought about you. A lot, over the years." Sarah's heart skipped, but she refused to let herself be swayed. She couldn't do this. Not now, not after everything. "I'm sure you have," she said, her voice steady, though her hands clenched at her sides. "You were the one who left. Remember?" John winced, but only slightly. "I was an idiot. I made a mistake. I never should have—" "You never should have left," Sarah interrupted. She wasn't going to let him finish that sentence. "You chose her. You walked away. And that was it, John. That was the choice you made." He looked down, guilt clouding his features. She could see it now. The man she had once known was still there, but he wasn't the same. This wasn't the man she had once loved. This was someone who had lived with the consequences of his choices for years, someone who had carried the weight of regret. "I know," he whispered, almost to himself. "I know, Sarah. I've regretted it every day since, but I didn't know what I was doing back then." She wanted to yell at him, to let him know just how much he had hurt her. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, and forced herself to take a deep breath. "It doesn't matter anymore, John," she said, keeping her voice steady. "It's been 10 years. You made your choice." He shook his head, his hand moving like he wanted to reach out to her, but he stopped himself. "You don't understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never stopped loving you. It was a mistake what I did, and I've spent years trying to make sense of it. I miss you, Sarah. I've never been able to let you go." The words hit her harder than she thought they would. For a moment, she almost believed him. She almost let herself fall back into the old patterns. But then she remembered the day he left, the coldness in his eyes when he told her it was over, the way he had walked away without a second glance, like she was nothing. Sarah froze. She hadn't told Lucy about the coffee shop encounter, but she didn't need to. Lucy had been her rock through everything. She knew her better than anyone. "I saw him," Sarah admitted, her voice quiet. "We talked. He apologized." Lucy frowned. "And you're considering forgiving him after everything?" Sarah sighed. "I don't know. Part of me wants to just ignore it, but another part of me wants to hear him out. I want to know why he did it." Lucy crossed her arms. "Sarah, you don't owe him anything. He hurt you, and now he's coming back like nothing happened." "I know," Sarah said, pacing the room. "I know I shouldn't care. I've moved on, but when I saw him it was like I was that girl again. The girl who believed in him. I don't know if I'm ready to just shut that part of me out." Lucy's expression softened. "I get it. But listen to me. You've worked so hard to get here, to rebuild your life. You don't need him to explain himself. You deserve better than this, Sarah." Sarah nodded, though a part of her still felt the pull. "I don't know if I can just let it go. There's so much I never got to say." "I understand," Lucy said, stepping forward and putting a hand on her shoulder. "But think about this. Are you doing this for closure, or are you doing this because you still want him back?" Sarah hesitated. The question hit her harder than she expected. She hadn't really thought about it that way. She wasn't sure if she wanted John back, but a part of her longed for closure, for some kind of explanation that would make the past feel less like a wound that hadn't fully healed. "I just need to know why he left," Sarah finally said, her voice small. "I need to know if he ever really loved me." Lucy sighed. "Then go ahead, talk to him. But don't forget who you are now. Don't forget what you've built. You don't owe him a damn thing." Sarah nodded, grateful for Lucy's unwavering support. "Thanks. I'll think about it." As Lucy left the room, Sarah sat down again, staring at her phone. She wasn't sure what to do next. Was it worth reopening old wounds, or was it time to leave the past where it belonged? The next few days dragged on in a haze. Sarah's mind kept returning to John, despite all her efforts to push him out. Every time she thought she was moving forward, his face would appear in her thoughts, and with it, a rush of emotions she had buried deep inside her. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she was fine, that she had moved on. But this felt like a test, a reminder that some wounds never really healed. John's messages kept coming, each one sounding more desperate than the last. He apologized again and again, offering vague explanations that only seemed to make things more confusing. The worst part was how much she wanted to believe him. It was almost as if hearing him express regret for leaving her gave her the sense of closure she had never gotten. She knew she shouldn't respond, but every message made her feel like she was being pulled back into the past. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, the weight of the decision before her began to feel unbearable. She picked up her phone and stared at it for a long time. The screen lit up with a message from John. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah, but I need you to know that I've never stopped loving you, not for a single moment. If you can, I just want to see you one last time. Please, I have to explain." Her heart raced as she read the words again. She could almost hear the sincerity in his voice. But then she remembered everything, his departure, the way he had turned his back on her without a second thought. His sudden desire to reconnect now felt more like an attempt to soothe his conscience than a genuine desire to fix what had been broken. But even so, the thought of seeing him again made her chest tighten. The quiet hum of her apartment felt oppressive. She wanted to ignore it all, to pretend that none of this mattered. But deep down, she knew she needed to face it. This was her past, knocking at the door, asking for one last chance to be understood. But was it for her, or was it for him? Finally, she typed a response. She couldn't ignore him forever, not when the words had been eating at her for days. You can see me, but this is the last time. I'm not doing this for you, John. I'm doing it for me. She sent the message before she could change her mind. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. She didn't know if she was making the right decision. She didn't know what she wanted from this meeting. Answers, maybe, or simply to prove to herself that she had moved on. Either way, she was sure of one thing. It was time to finally close this chapter of her life. The meeting was set for the next day in a small park near the edge of town. Sarah wasn't sure why she agreed to meet there of all places, but something about the quiet, peaceful setting seemed fitting. It was a neutral ground, far from the places they used to go together, away from the memories that had once tied them so tightly. When she arrived, John was already there, standing by a bench. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered, but still the same man who had once been her whole world. As she approached, he turned and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The air between them was thick, heavy with years of unsaid words. John looked at her with a mixture of hope and guilt. "Sarah," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "you look, I don't know, different, but in a good way." She nodded, but she didn't smile. "You don't have to do this, John. You don't have to try to make it seem like everything is okay. I'm here because I need answers, that's all." His face fell, and she could see the pain there. He had expected a warmer reception, she could tell, but that wasn't what she was offering. Not now. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "I guess I should have never left you." "You should have never left me," Sarah repeated quietly but firmly. "You walked away, John. You didn't even give me a reason." "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. I was stupid. I thought I needed more. I thought I needed excitement, adventure. I thought I could get all of that with Emily. But after all these years, I see it now. I see that I was just running from myself, and I ran from you." There it was, the reason. Or at least, the one he had decided to give her. Sarah stared at him, feeling a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. "You left me for someone else. You didn't even fight for us, and now you're telling me it was because you were running from yourself?" John opened his mouth as if to argue, but then seemed to think better of it. "Yes," he said quietly, "that's the truth. I thought it would be easier to leave, to find someone who wasn't as complicated as you, someone who didn't challenge me. But you know what? It was never easy. I've never been able to stop thinking about you. I made a huge mistake, Sarah." Sarah could feel the anger rising inside her, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she looked at him, her gaze steady. "It's too late for apologies, John. You made your choice, and I had to make mine." He flinched at her words, but he didn't look away. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, I just need to know if you can ever forgive me. If there's even a chance." "There's no chance," Sarah said, her voice final. "Not anymore." The words hung between them, heavy and final. Sarah's heart pounded, but a strange sense of peace settled over her. This was the closure she needed, even if it didn't look the way she had imagined it. John had been a part of her life, yes, but he no longer had the power to control her happiness. She had built a life without him, and that life was enough. John stood there for a moment, as if waiting for her to say something more. But Sarah didn't speak. She simply turned and began to walk away. Each step felt lighter, as though with each movement she was shedding the last remnants of the past. For the first time in years, Sarah knew she had made the right decision, and this time there would be no turning back. The days following her meeting with John were quieter than usual. Sarah threw herself into her work even more, as if the busyness could keep her from thinking about what had happened. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just the encounter with John. It was the realization that, in some strange way, she had never truly let go of him. Maybe not in the way he wanted, but there was a part of her that had still carried him, even in the years they were apart. She knew it wasn't love that lingered. It was something else. It was the remnants of a past that hadn't been fully closed. But now, after the conversation, she felt lighter, like she had finally let go of the weight he'd left behind. It wasn't easy, but it was done. She wasn't looking back anymore, but there was something else that came with it, something that Sarah hadn't expected. The days after John's apology, she noticed a change in herself. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't bitter. There was no desire for revenge, no longing to make him feel the pain he had caused her. All she felt was emptiness. Not in a bad way, but in a way that told her she was ready for something new, a new chapter, a new life. Her thoughts drifted to James, John's younger brother. She hadn't seen him in years, not since before the breakup. He had always been different from John, quieter, more thoughtful. Where John had been bold and confident, James had always been reserved, choosing his words carefully. But there was something about James that Sarah had always respected. He had never treated her like a trophy, never made her feel small. He had always been there for her, even when she and John were together, though he never overstepped. As Sarah sat in her office one afternoon, she found herself thinking about him again. She hadn't thought about James much over the years. He had never been a part of the equation after John left. But as she remembered their brief conversations, the way he had always looked out for her, something stirred in her chest. It was strange. She had been so focused on healing from the past that she hadn't stopped to think about the people who had supported her along the way. James had been one of those people, and now she was starting to wonder if she had overlooked something important back then. She couldn't help but wonder, had James ever looked at her the way John had? Had he ever cared for her in that way, the way she had always wished John had? But no, that wasn't the point. She was done with men who couldn't see her for who she was, done with the kind of love that required her to shrink. She didn't need anyone else to define her happiness. She had built her life around herself, and she was proud of it. Still, the thought of James lingered. Maybe it was because she had never gotten closure with him, never understood his role in her life. After all, he had always been there, offering quiet support from the sidelines. Maybe that's what had been missing. After a few more days of reflecting on everything, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to hold on to old thoughts, old feelings, or regrets anymore. She would move forward, but this time she would do it with clarity. She was going to reach out to James, not to rekindle anything, not to seek closure, but because she knew she needed to understand the relationship they had, to clear the fog that had always lingered between them. That night she sat down at her desk and pulled up her contacts. She stared at his name for a long time before typing a simple message. "Hey, James, it's been a while. I was hoping we could catch up sometime. Let me know if you're free." It wasn't a grand gesture, and it wasn't a declaration of anything. It was simply a step toward understanding something she had never fully explored. She pressed send before she could second-guess herself, then leaned back in her chair. She wasn't sure what would come of it, but she knew that if she was going to move forward, she needed to stop living in the shadow of her past. The message hung in the air, unanswered for a few hours. Sarah went about her evening, but a small part of her couldn't stop wondering how James would respond. Would he be surprised? Would he even want to talk to her after all these years? Finally, her phone buzzed. James's name flashed across the screen. "Of course, it's been way too long. Let's grab coffee tomorrow. I'll text you the details." Her heart skipped a beat. It was a simple message, but it felt significant. She had made the first step toward understanding a part of her life that had been left in the background for too long. Tomorrow, she would see James. She wasn't sure what would come of it, but she knew it was a conversation she needed to have. One that might finally give her the clarity she'd been searching for, not just about him, but about herself too. As Sarah put her phone down, she couldn't help but smile. Maybe things didn't always work out the way you expected, but that didn't mean they couldn't turn into something better. She wasn't holding on to the past anymore. She was finally ready to move forward, and no matter where that took her, she knew she'd be okay. The next day, Sarah met James at the small cafe they had agreed upon. It was a cozy place, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the town, where the quiet hum of conversation blended with the faint sound of soft music playing in the background. She arrived a little early, feeling a flutter of nerves that she hadn't expected. The years had passed, but somehow sitting across from James again felt like opening a door to a part of her past she wasn't sure she was ready to revisit. She sat down at a table near the window, watching as the sun streamed in, casting soft shadows across the wooden floors. It felt peaceful, almost surreal. She hadn't realized how much she had missed these kinds of simple moments, the calm before something important, the feeling of uncertainty mixed with curiosity. It had been so long since she'd been able to feel this way, just a little unsure about the outcome, but comfortable with the unknown. James walked in a few minutes later, his familiar quiet presence immediately making Sarah feel at ease. His hair was a little shorter than she remembered, his face a bit more weathered. But there was the same steady calm in his eyes that had always made her feel like everything would be okay when he was around. He smiled softly when he saw her, and for a moment it was as though no time had passed at all. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm but a little surprised. "It's good to see you." "You too," she replied, standing up to greet him. They shared a brief hug, and for a second she allowed herself to linger there, remembering a time when their lives had crossed in unexpected ways. Then she pulled back, smiling, and gestured for him to sit. They both sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, though, just a quiet recognition that both of them had changed. "So," Sarah said, breaking the silence, "how have you been? It's been, 10 years?" James chuckled softly, his eyes softening with a hint of nostalgia. 10 years. Feels like another lifetime ago. I'm good, though. A lot's changed since then." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He shifted in his seat, looking away for a brief moment before meeting her gaze again. "I don't know. Life, I guess. I never really understood what was going on with John and you, and I didn't push. I guess I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I am, apart from him, you know?" Sarah nodded. She could relate. After everything with John, she had spent years figuring out who she was without him, without the man who had once defined her future. "I get it," she said quietly. "I think we all go through that at some point. At least, I hope we do." James smiled faintly, and there was a moment of silence between them again. This time, it was more comfortable. They both knew why they were here, even if the words were hard to say. "So, how's your life been?" James asked after a moment, his voice soft but genuinely curious. Sarah hesitated. She had spent years building a life that was hers, independent and free of the weight of the past, but part of her still felt like she hadn't fully shared it with anyone. Not like this. She wasn't sure how to sum up the last decade in a few sentences. "I've been good," she said, settling back in her chair. "Busy, but good. I've built my own company, and I'm proud of that. I've traveled, met new people, learned a lot about myself. It's been a lot. But I guess I needed to find out what I was capable of when I didn't have anyone else to lean on." James looked at her with something between admiration and sadness in his eyes. "You always were strong," he said softly. "I think I knew that, even when we were younger." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to that. She felt a wave of gratitude for his words, but also a quiet ache, as though there was so much left unsaid. She had always respected James for the way he never tried to change her, for the way he had quietly stood by her side when John had been so caught up in his own world. "But it's not just about strength, is it?" Sarah said, leaning forward slightly. It's about realizing that you've spent too long trying to prove something to the wrong people. I think for a long time I kept thinking that I needed John's approval to feel whole, and I didn't even know I was doing it until after everything fell apart. James's expression softened, and he reached for his coffee, taking a slow sip. I can't pretend to know what that was like for you, but I'm glad you found your way. There was a pause, a moment where neither of them spoke, but the air between them felt lighter somehow. "So what about you?" Sarah asked, turning the question back on him. "What's your life been like?" James smiled faintly. Same old, same old. But honestly, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the people I care about you, too. I guess I always wondered what happened with you and John. It wasn't that I didn't respect your space, I couldn't help but wonder. I always thought he was the one who messed things up, and I wasn't wrong, was I? Sarah smiled, a little sadly. No, you weren't. He messed it up. And I didn't see it at the time, but I think I was too focused on making it work with him that I didn't see what else was right in front of me. She paused, her eyes meeting his. I'm not sure if you ever felt the same way, but I guess I need to say thank you for always being there, even when I didn't see it. James's face softened. You don't have to thank me. You were always there for me too, in your own way. I always wanted to make sure you knew you weren't alone, even when it felt like everything was falling apart around you. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah pause. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of warmth that went beyond friendship. She had spent so much of her life building walls, trying to protect herself from the pain of losing someone again. But James was different. He had always seen her, truly seen her, and she realized then that he had always been there, quietly, steadfastly, waiting for her to see him too. She didn't know where this conversation would go, or if it would lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of the past holding her back. Maybe this wasn't about moving on from John. Maybe it was about moving towards something else entirely. And as they sat there exchanging memories and laughter, Sarah felt something shift. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with a clear heart, and maybe, just maybe, with James by her side. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Sarah's meetings, projects, and the steady rhythm of her routine kept her busy, but she couldn't ignore the subtle shift in her life after that coffee meeting with James. He had become a presence she couldn't quite define, yet it was undeniable. They had spent more time together in those few weeks than in the entire decade since their paths had diverged. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just quiet dinners, casual walks, shared laughs, but somehow it felt important, like they were rebuilding something that had been left unfinished. Every time Sarah saw James, she felt a growing sense of peace. He was different from the man she had once known, and yet, in some ways, he was the same. The same steady, thoughtful presence that had always grounded her. And with each conversation, each moment spent together, she realized that maybe she had never fully understood him, never really seen him the way she was starting to now. One evening, after an impromptu dinner at her apartment, James lingered. They sat on her couch, the conversation light, but tinged with an undercurrent of something unspoken. Sarah was getting used to this feeling, this quiet anticipation, but it wasn't until he looked at her in a certain way, his eyes more intense than usual, that she felt the shift in the air between them. He shifted in his seat, his fingers fidgeting slightly with the edge of his glass. I've been thinking, he began, his voice a little more serious than before, about everything we've talked about. And I can't help but wonder, if I'd been a little more vocal all those years ago, if I'd said something to you back then, would things have turned out differently? Sarah felt a jolt of surprise, not expecting the question, but also not sure how to answer. You mean, if you'd told me how you felt about me? James nodded, his eyes not leaving hers. I never wanted to make things complicated, and I think I was afraid that if I said something, it would ruin everything. I saw you with John, and I knew you were happy, or at least I thought you were, so I stayed quiet. I didn't want to come between that." Sarah leaned back, processing his words. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected James to admit that he had felt something for her, something more than just friendship. It was almost impossible to imagine now, after everything. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had always felt something different with James, a connection that wasn't quite friendship, but something she hadn't been able to name before. "James, Sarah started, but he raised a hand, stopping her. I know, he said quickly, his tone a little more tense. "It's a lot, and it's probably not the right time for us to figure all of this out. But I just needed you to know, because I've spent years regretting not saying anything, and I don't want to live with that regret anymore." Sarah's chest tightened at the rawness in his words. She had always respected James, admired his ability to stay calm and composed, but now she saw a side of him she hadn't expected, vulnerable, honest. The truth in his eyes made her heart race. She had always been afraid of opening up again, afraid of letting someone in, only to have them leave, like John had. But there was something about James that made her feel safe, something steady and true in the way he looked at her. "I didn't know," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't know you felt that way." James smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "I know. I never gave you the chance to know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them. It was strange. Sarah had never imagined that this would be the path their relationship would take. She had always seen him as the quiet, reliable friend. But now, as she looked at him, she couldn't ignore the way her heart fluttered in her chest. Could it be that after everything, after all the years spent moving on from John, she was standing on the edge of something new, something that, just maybe, was better than what she had ever imagined? "I don't know what this means," Sarah said finally, meeting his gaze, "but I think I need to take things slow. I'm not ready to rush into anything, but I do want to see where this goes." James's eyes softened and a warm smile spread across his face. "I don't want to rush either. I just want to be here with you. No pressure, no expectations, just us." Sarah exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope, a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She wasn't sure where this would lead, if it would lead anywhere at all, but she knew that whatever happened, this moment, this conversation, had opened a door to a new beginning, not just with James, but with herself. She had spent so many years healing, so many years afraid to love again, but now, with James, she could see a path forward, one where she could open her heart without fear of it breaking again. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was finally ready to take a step forward, not just for herself, but for the possibility of something more with James. The future seemed uncertain, but for once, uncertainty didn't scare her. It felt like a promise that, with time, she would learn to trust again, and maybe, just maybe, love again. "Let's see where it goes," she said, her voice more confident than she had ever felt. James nodded, his smile widening as he reached out and gently took her hand. "Yeah, let's." As they sat there, hands intertwined, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and James grew closer in ways neither of them had expected. The connection between them, once buried beneath years of silence and missed opportunities, bloomed in the most natural way. They spent their time doing simple things, taking walks in the park, grabbing coffee at their favorite spots, and catching up on lost time. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It wasn't about forcing a relationship. It was about rediscovering each other, rebuilding trust, and allowing themselves the space to see where this could lead. Sarah had always been the kind of person who kept her emotions close guarding them fiercely after everything she had been through. But with James, something felt different. He never pushed. He never rushed. He simply allowed her to be herself, to speak her mind when she was ready, and to be vulnerable when she needed to be. One afternoon, after a walk through the park, they sat on a bench overlooking the lake. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the water. Sarah leaned back, feeling the calm of the moment wash over her. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly the kind of stillness she had craved for so long. "How did we end up here?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the question had been on her mind for days. "I mean, we've both been through so much, and now it feels like everything is falling into place." "But how?" James turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I think sometimes we have to go through all the mess to get to the good stuff. We make mistakes, we hurt each other, but in the end, if we're lucky, we figure it out. I don't know why we ended up here, Sarah, but I'm glad we did." Sarah's heart warmed at his words, and for a moment she let herself believe it. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was how it was meant to be. That all the years of pain, of heartbreak, of loss had led her to this moment, sitting on a bench with the person who had always quietly been there for her, the person who had seen her for who she truly was. She thought about John, about everything that had happened with him, and for the first time it didn't sting. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. She had loved John, but that was in the past. She had moved on, and now she was here with James, looking forward to a future that was undefined but full of promise. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things were different?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we had been open with each other back then?" James's smile faded slightly, and he looked out over the water as if pondering her question. "I used to wonder about that," he admitted. "I always thought maybe if I had said something, things might have turned out differently. But now, I don't know. I think everything happened the way it was supposed to. It wasn't the right time before. Maybe it is now." His words resonated with Sarah. She knew he was right. The timing hadn't been right all those years ago. She had been caught up in a relationship with John, and James had stayed on the sidelines, never pushing, never intruding. Maybe back then she wasn't ready to see him the way she saw him now. Maybe she had been too focused on the wrong things to notice that the right one had always been there. "But you're right," she continued, her voice steady. "If we hadn't gone through everything we did, we wouldn't be here. And I think we're both ready now, ready to figure out what this is without the past weighing us down." James nodded slowly, his hand brushing against hers. "Yeah, we're both different people now, and I think that's a good thing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They sat there in the fading sunlight, allowing the silence to wrap around them like a comfortable blanket. It was peaceful, but it was also full of unspoken words, words they didn't need to say. Because in that moment, they both knew that they were on the same page. They were in this together, whatever this was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft pink and purple hue across the sky, Sarah felt a shift inside her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't earth-shattering, but it was real. She had spent so long fearing the future, afraid of making the same mistakes again. But now, with James by her side, she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid to open up, to let herself trust again. She wasn't afraid to take the next step, even if it was uncertain, because she knew that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't doing it alone. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking up at James, "for being here, for not giving up on me." James smiled, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. I'm just glad we're here." And as the evening faded into night, Sarah realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful, something real. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. She was ready to see where it took her, and with James by her side, she knew she would be okay. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind. Sarah and James continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. It wasn't just the quiet moments or shared glances, it was the way they supported each other, the way they let their guard down, and allowed each other to see who they truly were. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt safe. She felt like she could trust someone again, without fear, without hesitation. It was strange, but in the best way possible. One afternoon, they found themselves sitting together at a local cafe, the same one they had met at weeks ago. This time, it felt different. There was no lingering uncertainty. There was no sense of hesitation. They had moved past all of that. Sarah was sipping her coffee, listening as James told her about a recent project he was working on. As always, he spoke with his usual calm, methodical tone. But today, there was something else there, a flicker of excitement in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. She realized that, in many ways, James had always been there, quietly supporting her in the background, but now she was starting to see him for who he really was, someone who had dreams, ambitions, and a quiet strength that she had always admired. "And what about you?" James asked, setting his cup down and turning his attention back to her. "How's everything going with your work?" "Your business?" Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "It's been great. Busy but good. It's always a challenge, but I like it that way. I've built something from the ground up, and I'm starting to see the results of all that hard work." James nodded, his smile genuine. "I've always admired that about you, Sarah. You've never been afraid to go after what you want." Her smile faltered slightly, and she looked down at her cup. "I've had to learn not to be afraid. After everything with John, I knew I couldn't afford to be. I had to rely on myself." James reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. The simple gesture made Sarah's heart skip. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," he said softly. "I think you've always known how to take care of yourself, even when you didn't have anyone else to lean on." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. There was so much history between them, so much unspoken, that had led them to this moment. But in this moment, she felt a quiet understanding. It was as if they both knew they had been through their own struggles, their own heartaches, and now they were here, together. "I never realized how much I needed someone like you," Sarah admitted, her voice soft but steady. "Someone who just gets it, someone who doesn't try to fix me or tell me what I should be doing. You've always accepted me for who I am." James's expression softened, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "That's all I've ever wanted, Sarah, to be here for you, to support you without trying to change you." The sincerity in his words sent a ripple of emotion through her, and for a brief moment, Sarah's thoughts flashed back to the pain of her past, to John and the way he had never really understood her. John had always tried to make her fit into his world, to fit into his idea of what she should be. But James saw her for who she truly was, and it made all the difference. As they sat there, the conversation flowed easily between them. They talked about work, about old memories, about the future. There were no barriers anymore, no hesitation, just a quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was real. And it wasn't about fixing what had been broken. It was about building something new, something stronger. But as much as Sarah appreciated the closeness they were building, a part of her still wondered if she was ready for more, if she was ready to fully let go of the past and embrace what was right in front of her. It wasn't that she didn't want to be with James. It was that she had been hurt so deeply before that sometimes it was hard to imagine trusting someone completely again. As though reading her mind, James leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes searching hers. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Sarah," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to jump into something you're not ready for. I just want you to know that whenever you are ready, I'll be here. No pressure, just us." His words hit her like a wave. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to have all the answers. James wasn't asking her to make a decision. He was simply offering her the time and space she needed to figure things out on her own. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, to hear that she didn't have to rush, that she could take her time. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe it was okay to not have all the answers. And in that moment, Sarah realized that sometimes the best things in life came when you weren't looking for them. She hadn't been looking for love again. She hadn't even been looking for someone like James. But here he was, and somehow that felt like enough. As the evening wore on, the cafe began to empty out, the soft murmur of conversations fading into the background. Sarah and James sat together, not saying much, but letting the silence speak volumes. There was no need for words anymore. They both knew that what they were building was real, and that was enough for now. The future was uncertain, but for once, Sarah wasn't afraid of it. With James by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. She didn't need to rush or force anything. All she needed to do was trust the process, trust him, and trust herself. And in that moment, she did. The days turned into weeks, and the connection between Sarah and James only deepened. It wasn't a dramatic love story. There were no grand gestures or fireworks, no sweeping declarations of undying love. Instead, it was the kind of love that grew slowly, quietly, but with a certainty that felt unshakable. It was in the little things, the way they shared a quiet laugh over a bad movie, the way James always seemed to know when Sarah needed space, and the way Sarah's heart seemed to settle in his presence as though she had finally found a place where she belonged. They spent countless afternoons together, strolling through the park, having dinner, or just sitting in silence, enjoying each other's company. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It was about savoring the moments, about letting the bond between them grow at its own pace. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people quietly discovering each other piece by piece. But even as things grew between them, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging thought that lingered in the back of her mind. Could she truly let go of the past? Could she let herself fall fully into this with James without constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if she was making a mistake? The scars from her past were still there, lingering just beneath the surface, ready to resurface at any moment. It wasn't that she didn't trust James. It was that she didn't trust herself to make the right choices again. She had trusted John once, given him everything she had, and he had walked away without a second thought. Was she ready to put her heart out there again? One evening, after another of their casual dinners, Sarah found herself lost in thought as they walked back to her apartment. She hadn't meant to get so quiet, but the thoughts had overtaken her. James noticed, of course, always paying attention to the small things that Sarah herself often overlooked. "Hey," he said softly, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk, "you've been quiet tonight. Is everything okay?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. She wasn't sure what was bothering her, but she knew she needed to speak. "I've been thinking a lot," she admitted, her voice low. "About us, about what this means. I don't know if I'm ready to trust again, James." James didn't immediately respond. Instead, he simply reached out and gently touched her arm, his fingers warm against her skin. "You don't have to be ready right now," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything. I'm just here, Sarah. I'm here whenever you're ready." The sincerity in his voice hit her harder than she expected. It was in the way he said it, with no expectation, no pressure, just quiet understanding. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift. Maybe she wasn't ready for everything, but she didn't have to be. She didn't have to have all the answers. She could take her time, and James would be there, steady and patient, waiting for her when she was. "I think I need time," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Time to figure out what I want." James smiled, a small, soft smile that made her heart flutter. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to have all the answers right now. She could take things one step at a time, and James would be right there with her, not asking for more than she could give. It wasn't about rushing into something. It was about building something real, something strong. And for the first time, she believed that was possible. As Sarah spent more time with James, she began to realize just how much he had always been a part of her life, even from the sidelines. The memories of their past, how they had quietly shared glances and brief moments of connection, began to resurface. But now they didn't hurt. They felt like pieces of a puzzle, parts of a bigger picture that had been waiting to be put together. James had always been there, always steady, always supportive. But now, it wasn't about being the quiet background presence. It was about being someone who had the chance to stand in the foreground, side by side with her. One evening, as they sat in a small bistro, their laughter filling the space between them, Sarah realized just how far she had come. The weight of her past, the pain, the heartbreak, didn't seem as heavy anymore. It wasn't that it was gone, it was just that it no longer defined her. She had learned to stand on her own, to be okay with who she was, flaws and all. And now she was learning to trust again, not just in others, but in herself. "So," James said, leaning forward slightly, his eyes sparkling with curiosity, "what's next for you, Sarah? Where do you see yourself going from here?" The question caught her off guard, and she paused for a moment, considering it. She hadn't really thought about the future in a long time. The future had always seemed like something distant, something uncertain. But now, sitting across from James, she realized that maybe it wasn't as uncertain as she had once thought. I think I want to keep building my business, keep doing the things that make me happy," she said slowly. "But I also want to see where this goes, where we go. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. I think I'm ready to face the future." James smiled, and in that moment, Sarah saw something in him that she hadn't noticed before, an understanding, a quiet strength. He wasn't asking her to make any promises. He wasn't asking for anything beyond what she was willing to give, and that made all the difference. "I think you're going to do amazing things, Sarah," he said, his voice warm with sincerity, "and I'll be here no matter what." For the first time in a long time, Sarah realized that the future wasn't something to fear. It wasn't something to run from. It was something she could embrace, something she could face with someone by her side. And maybe that someone was James. Maybe they weren't rushing into anything, but they were taking their time, building something real. And that, she realized, was enough. The weeks passed, and things between Sarah and James felt right. They continued to spend time together, their connection growing with each shared moment. But as time went on, Sarah began to feel the stirrings of something deeper, something that wasn't just about companionship. It was about the possibility of a future together. She wasn't ready to jump into anything. She wasn't sure what that future would look like. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to imagine it. But as much as she felt herself moving forward, there was still a part of her that hesitated. She didn't want to fall into the same trap she had before, to allow someone else to define her happiness. She had spent so many years being independent, carving out a life for herself. Could she share that life with someone else? Could she trust someone enough to allow them in without losing herself in the process? She thought about John, about the way he had walked away from her without a second thought. And though she didn't feel angry anymore, there was still a lingering sadness, a feeling that she had given so much of herself to someone who didn't value it. She didn't want to make that mistake again. But with James, she felt something different, something that wasn't rooted in fear or insecurity. It was rooted in trust, trust that he wouldn't try to change her, trust that he would let her be who she was, no matter what. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie in the dim light of her apartment, Sarah found herself lost in thought again. James had noticed her silence, and as always, he knew just when to ask. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently, glancing over at her with a quiet curiosity. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, feeling the weight of her thoughts. "I think I'm starting to realize that maybe I'm ready for more. Maybe I'm ready to let someone in. But it's scary, James. It's scary to let go of the past and trust again." James turned to face her fully, his expression serious but full of understanding. "You don't have to let go of the past all at once. Just take it one step at a time, Sarah. We'll figure it out together." Her heart skipped at his words. It wasn't about rushing forward. It wasn't about forcing anything. It was about taking things at her own pace, knowing that James would be right there beside her. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was finally ready to move forward, not just with James, but with her life, and that felt like the most important step of all. Over the next few months, Sarah and James continued to navigate their relationship with a quiet confidence. There were still moments of uncertainty, still times when Sarah would question herself, wondering if she was making the right choices. But every time those doubts crept in, James was there, steady, patient, unwavering. He never pressured her. He never made her feel like she was moving too slowly. He simply let her be herself, and that made all the difference. Their connection deepened, and with it, the realization that what they were building was something real, something worth holding on to. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. They were learning, growing, and building a future that, for the first time, felt like it was in their hands. And as Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment one evening, looking out at the city below, she realized that this was the life she had always wanted, one where she could love without fear, without hesitation, and one where she could truly be herself. With James by her side, Sarah knew that the future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. As the months passed, Sarah began to realize just how much her life had changed. She had spent so many years focused on building a career, on proving to herself that she could do it alone. She had never imagined that, in the midst of her independent life, she would find someone who could quietly slip into her world, not disrupt it, but enhance it. James had never asked her to change, never demanded anything of her beyond what she was willing to give. It was that understanding, that unspoken agreement, that had made their connection so strong. There were still moments when Sarah would catch herself wondering if she was ready to take the next step, wondering if she was truly healed from the hurt of her past. But with James, she didn't feel the need to rush. There was no ticking clock, no urgency. It was just them, together, learning each day what it meant to be with each other. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her apartment, Sarah and James found themselves on the couch, relaxing together. The city lights flickered outside the window, casting a warm glow into the room. It was a simple night, but in Sarah's heart, it felt like something more. She could feel the steady beat of her own heart, the calm that had settled inside her as she let go of the fear and embraced the possibility of what was to come. James turned to her, his eyes soft but full of meaning. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about what we've built. And I know we've taken our time with everything, but I just want you to know how much this means to me." Sarah looked at him, her heart full of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had learned so much about herself, about love, and about what it meant to trust again. And here, with James, she finally understood that the future didn't have to be something to fear. It could be something to embrace, something to look forward to. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice soft. "This, with you, it's more than I ever thought it could be, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. With you." The words felt natural, as though they had been waiting for the right moment to be spoken. And when they were finally out there, hanging in the air between them, it was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. There was no more uncertainty, no more fear of making the wrong choice. She was ready for this. She was ready to move forward without hesitation. James smiled, the warmth in his eyes unmistakable. He reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "We'll take it slow," he said, his voice steady. "But we'll do it together. That's all I've ever wanted." And in that moment, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about finding love again. It was about finding herself, finding peace in the knowledge that she could love without fear, without holding back. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward stronger than ever before. As Sarah leaned into James, resting her head on his shoulder, she felt the warmth of the future wrap around her. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't guaranteed. But with James by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. Time passed, and Sarah and James continued to grow closer. They faced challenges, of course. Life always had a way of throwing curveballs, but they faced them together, side by side. There were moments of doubt, times when Sarah would question whether she was truly ready for everything that came with a real relationship. But with each passing day, she became more and more confident in her choices. James never wavered. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, never asked her to hurry up and make decisions. He simply allowed her to be herself, to move at her own pace, and that, more than anything, gave Sarah the security she needed to let her guard down. One evening, after a particularly difficult week at work, Sarah found herself sitting on the couch, exhausted and mentally drained. James walked into the room, holding 2 cups of tea, and sat beside her. The way he simply showed up, no questions asked, made her heart swell with gratitude. She had spent so long thinking that she needed to do everything on her own, that no one would be there for her in the way she truly needed. But with James, she felt different. She felt supported, understood, and most importantly, loved. "How are you holding up?" James asked, his voice gentle, yet concerned. He always seemed to know when she needed to talk, when she needed to be heard. Sarah took a deep breath and smiled, though it was a little weary. "I'm getting there. It's just been a long week. But I'm okay." James set the tea down and turned to face her fully, his hand reaching for hers. "You don't have to be okay all the time, you know. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah squeezed his hand, the comfort in his words washing over her. It wasn't about fixing everything or making her feel like she had to have all the answers. It was about being there, simply showing up when it mattered most. "I know," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I've ever really understood that until now." James smiled, and there was something so genuine, so real in that smile that it made Sarah's heart ache. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was theirs, and that was enough. As Sarah sat there, hand in hand with James, she realized that the future wasn't something to fear anymore. It wasn't something that had to be figured out all at once. They would take it one step at a time, together, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the path ahead would be shaped by both of them, side by side, facing whatever came their way. And as the days continued to pass, Sarah understood that sometimes the most important step wasn't about moving forward fast, but about moving forward with someone who understood you, someone who was willing to wait and build a future with you, step by step. With James by her side, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she would never be alone. The seasons shifted, and as the months passed, Sarah and James continued to carve out their space in each other's lives, a space where they both felt safe, understood, and loved. They had faced their fears, confronted their doubts, and somehow, together, they had woven a future that felt strong, unshakable. The fears that had once held Sarah back, the walls she had built around her heart to protect herself, had started to crumble. It wasn't that the past was gone, it would always be a part of her. But with James, she had found a way to move forward, not despite her past, but because of it. Her scars had made her who she was, but now they no longer defined her. One night, as they stood together in the kitchen, Sarah stirred a pot of soup, the soft hum of the music in the background adding to the calm of the evening. It was a simple moment, a quiet routine they had come to enjoy. She could hear James in the living room, fiddling with the television remote, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to rush or plan. This was enough. James walked into the kitchen, a grin on his face. "So, how's the soup coming along?" Sarah laughed, glancing at him over her shoulder. "It's coming. You're welcome to help." James raised an eyebrow, his smile teasing. "Help? I thought you had it all under control." She turned back to the stove with a smile. "I do, but I'm willing to let you in, just this once." He stepped forward, his presence warm behind her. Without thinking, he placed a hand on her shoulder, leaning in to kiss the top of her head. The small, affectionate gesture sent a wave of warmth through Sarah, a reminder of how far they had come, how far she had come. "You know," James said softly, his voice a little more serious now, "I've been thinking." Sarah turned to face him, sensing that something important was coming. "About what?" He took a deep breath as though gathering his thoughts, and for a moment Sarah's heart beat a little faster. "About us," he said, his eyes searching hers, "about everything we've been through, and where we're going. And I want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for all of it, Sarah. I'm ready for whatever comes next, and I'm not going anywhere, not ever." The words, simple and yet so powerful, hit Sarah in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't that she didn't already know James's heart. She did. But hearing him say it with such conviction made her realize just how far they had come together. She had spent so many years afraid to trust, afraid of letting someone in, afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past. But now, with James, she felt something different, something real, something solid. "I know," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here too. I'm ready for whatever comes next, with you." And as those words left her mouth, she knew in that moment that this wasn't just about a relationship. It was about a future, one that they would build together, step by step. They didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't have to know exactly what the future held. But they had each other, and for Sarah, that was enough. As they stood there in the warmth of the kitchen, their fingers entwined, Sarah realized that this was the beginning of something new. Not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time, she had found someone who understood her, someone who loved her, not in spite of her past, but because of it. The future no longer seemed like a place of uncertainty. It felt like a place of possibility. And with James by her side, Sarah knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.